right, well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. I'm Holly Honig. I am Empower Missouri's Policy Director. Just really thrilled that you've all chosen to share your lunch hour with us for our second day of our Week of Action. Empower Missouri's Week of Action is a week each year during the legislative session that we dedicate to honoring the 120-plus-year-old mission of our organization. We convene community members from across the state to eradicate poverty through meaningful policy change. It's really hard work. We can't do it alone. We're just so thrilled that you're here and joining us for that. Advocates are joining us for our day of action at the Capitol tomorrow from 10 to 3. Throughout the week, we're offering virtual sessions like this one that combine advocacy skill building with our amazing advocacy director, Sarah Owsley, with a dive into specific policy priorities from our coalitions with our policy managers. Yesterday, we discussed how to communicate about poverty with your legislators, and we learned about the Transitional Benefits Program, and we're given guidance for taking action right away. Today, Sarah's going to lead us through some training and learning about researching a bill's impact. And we have a special guest from FAM, Maria Gellner, who's here with us to share information and guide us through advocacy actions around the sentencing disparity between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. So again, thank you for joining us today. And Sarah, you can take it from here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Holly, and thank you all for joining us today. I really love being able to sort of teach advocacy skills, expand the field of advocates. It's clear to Empower Missouri that the very best work that we can do will still not be enough because we need to change who is in the Capitol, who is talking to lawmakers, and what they're talking about. So always so glad to have folks join us for those opportunities. And spend time really researching how we make impactful change for our neighbors, which is such a necessary process. So today we're going to talk about researching a bill's impact. Two sort of caveats. The first is that I could talk to you for 6 hours about this and still probably not really leave you with tons of skills. So if you leave this 15 minutes and you're like, I sort of know, but I don't know a ton. I don't feel like I know everything. That's okay. That's pretty normal. The other thing is if you have questions along the way, there are sort of two ways for you to handle that. I am fine with you interrupting me and let's, and us like kind of working through that question together. You are also really welcome to pop that in the chat box. There'll be an opportunity for questions kind of at the end if you want to wait and see if other folks have your question or if that question is answered before we get back around to those to the question and answer at the end here. So the very first step in understanding how to research a bill's impact is understanding and reminding yourself, something I remind myself every day and our staff frequently, the lawmaking process is confusing. It's designed that way. It's because it's not really built for many of us, right? It is not really built to be inclusive to folks who are people of color, to women, right? Like this process was built for white property owning men to sort of make the rules for everyone else. And that in that process, right, we decided that it was fine, that it would be confusing. We also do not spend a lot of time through the public education system really talking about what the lawmaking process looks like and how that happens. And that's not a you problem. That's not because you're not an engaged citizen. It's not because you are just not smart by any means. It's just that's the way the system is designed. And so we need to understand how the system is designed in order to disrupt that, change it, make it better for people in poverty, make it easier to access. And that is one of the goals Empower Missouri has. So remember, when this process feels overwhelming, that is not a you problem. It is not because you are not well suited, and it's not because you don't belong in these spaces. It's entirely because we need you in these spaces. We need you to be here working on these problems together. And this is how it was designed, unfortunately, which is a really good reason to kind of amp us up and remind us that we need to be here. So the first step really, or the second step, I suppose, in researching a bill's impact is understanding what you're reading and what the bill is going to change. So here's a little piece of language. When you look up a bill number on the House or the Senate website or through some sort of third-party process, we use Fast Democracy here at Empower Missouri and really like that. But when you look up the bill language, it can feel confusing because this is what the language looks like, right? What part is different? What's changing, right? So understanding and remembering that the part that's in regular typeface, right? Any amount of gamma hydroxys, blah, 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 right? That's the law already. This bill is not going to change the part that's in regular typeface. That's just what the law already says. That's what somebody else already decided. And we may or may not be able to move some changes into some of that language sometimes as the bill is moving forward, because the bill is about all of this language, right? But that's not what's actually being proposed at this time. Those things are already statute. That's already what the law is. Do you see there on the second line where it says 10 and it's in brackets and it's crossed out? That part would be erased from the law if this bill passes. That part would be erased entirely. You wouldn't see that anymore. If you looked up, previous to 2023, you would find that language. But if you looked at this statute, if this bill passes, if you looked at that statute moving forward, that part will no longer be there. And the bolded part is the new part. So the language that's bolded, 3 but less than 14, that's the change, right? That's what the language will look like moving forward if this bill passes. When you look up this statute, it's going to all be in regular typeface, and that's what the new law will be. And so understanding, because sometimes we can read a bill and we don't like what's in regular typeface. There may be an opportunity to influence change in that space as well, but that's not what this bill does right now. And so we need to remember that that's not what the bill sponsor is trying to do. This is just what the language already says. So understanding what the bill is going to change is a really important step. The next question is, what is the bill going to do, right? Understand the current impact of how this law is impacting people in Missouri or across the country, wherever we're seeing this language, right? Understand what this currently looks like. The second thing we want to do is kind of look at other places. Where has this change been implemented? Very rarely are Missouri lawmakers hey, here's a brand new idea, let's put in language. It happens sometimes, but not super commonly. Most often, we're going to see other states who have done this kind of change, other cities who have done this change, et cetera. We can look at their outcomes to really understand how it might impact folks who live here in Missouri. This is where it's really useful to be in relationship and partnership with organizations like Empower Missouri, FAM, other national partners, similar organizations in other types of states, et cetera, so that we can just make a phone call instead of doing some cold Googling, right? We can just say, we see that you did this change 2 years ago. How has that really impacted people in poverty in your state? Has it had the impact you wanted? Sometimes we can see there's a procedural issue if you don't do the language exactly right, et cetera. And so that's really useful. We also can totally do a cold Google, but it's most useful if we start with Google Scholar, which is a place where we'll find peer-reviewed research instead of kind of news stories or things we think might be the case, right? Thought pieces, et cetera. These are peer-reviewed studies, the same way that if you think way back to if you were a person in high school or college and you needed peer-reviewed journal, peer-reviewed research for whatever papers you were writing. Google Scholar is the same type of interface as those library systems that you probably no longer have access to. And so often papers are available there for free. And a little bit of an insider tip, if the paper is not available for free, almost always if you email the author of that paper, they will send it to you because they, when you look them up and they cost $4.99, the people who wrote that paper don't get any of that money. And so they don't really want you to pay that either, right? They want their research to be out there and available. And so if you find something that has a pay price on it, you can often get around that. The next question is, who is the impacted individual? And this is difficult at a policy level sometimes, right? We really need to look at who are going to be impacted by this change, right? Bills that change things for landlords impact tenants because tenants are the ones without the power. They're the ones who have less say. So remembering that it isn't always the person that's named in the bill that's going to be impacted by the change that's in the bill. But it's important to keep in mind, who is that impacted person or community, and how are we responding to that? We need to really look and consider if any of these folks are likely to be disproportionately impacted, particularly people of color, people with disabilities, people with low incomes, people who work multiple jobs. Those folks are often disproportionately impacted by changes, particularly in the criminal legal system. And so we really need to take some time to consider that. And then we kind of want to wonder to ourselves, right? Think through to ourselves, will there be unintended consequences to this change? What is the, are there things people that'll be impacted that we're not thinking about right now. If we make a change to landlord-tenant law, how does that impact kids who live in those units, right? What are those unintended consequences? We want to think like, what do we know from other states who have this law, thinking back to before? Where else can we connect it to changes that have already happened? Where can we look at research that is likely available to us or data that is likely available to us from other states? What can we guess because of our proximity to the problem? If I am a person who has experience with the criminal legal system and this particular law would have impacted my case, what can I know about how that might have happened with my proximity or with the proximity of my partners and people who are centered in the work and the decision-making process, people with those lived expertise, that lived experience, what can they tell us? So not just our experience, but their experiences as well, and how can we fold that into our response to how this bill might move forward, or what we need to be thinking about as we consider what a bill might move forward. And then finally, nearly done with you, I promise to turn you over to the our wonderful experts as well, but how big is that impact, right? You want to ground your answer in data if we can find it. What do we know about that problem that the bill is hoping to address? If it's 500,000 Missouri households are impacted by this issue, then the impact is potentially 500,000 people, but it might also be significantly more or less than that, right? What do we know about the problem that the bill is hoping to address? How many Missourians face this problem? Will the change for them be good or bad? Will it really make that much of a difference, right? Do we know one way or another? Can we expect the same results that other states have had? And why or why not? How might Missouri's criminal code look different? How might the way our processes work change? What that impact might be? And then finally, how significant is that impact? And this is a combination of data, what we know from like the number of households that this bill is likely to impact, and anecdotal, like, this might raise their taxes by $5 per year, which may or may not be a significant impact, right? So it's a combination of both things, both data and what we know about the problem, what we know about the population, and what we know about our neighbors here in Missouri. So looking at how significant that impact will be helps us determine both the impact of the bill and, frankly, like how much work we should do to get this thing passed or not passed, right? If it impacts lots of people, but in a very small way, we might look at that differently than a bill that impacts only a few people, but in a really huge, significant, life-altering way, right? And so those are just kind of questions that we would ask at the organizational level. And with that, that's the end of me. I am going to check the chat box here, but I don't know, Holly, if there were any questions that felt pressing that we should answer before we move on. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Gwen.
Yeah, I didn't see any questions. I actually do have one, though. If you can let people know, you mentioned Google Scholar earlier. How does a person who's not familiar with Google Scholar and just regular Google, how do they access that? You're still on mute.
I'm so sorry, Holly. I am on mute. It's scholar.google.com. And then you search things the same sort of way that you might search things other ways. You can also look up case law, which is really useful for those of us who feel like they know a little lawyery things, but are not lawyers. It gives us access to some of that as well. And remember to kind of lean on your resources that might be around you to help interpret the answers that you might get through any type of research, including Google Scholar.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And and so with that, we're going to turn it over to Gwen Smith, who is our criminal justice policy manager, to introduce our special guest from FAM.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Holly. Great to see everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this virtual session. And I'm really excited to introduce Maria Gellner with FAM. Maria is a public interest attorney and advocate for equal justice. At FAM, she works with policymakers, families, the public, and the media on criminal justice priorities in multiple jurisdictions throughout the country from her home base in Pennsylvania. FAM is a member of the Community Justice Coalition, and Maria and I have been meeting with a lot of other partners to talk about a lot of different key policies, including correctional oversight legislation and crack cocaine powder sentencing disparity, which is what she's going to share with you about today. So without further ado, Maria, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you have a very busy schedule, so really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this issue that you guys have successfully gotten some legislation filed on in this session. So I will turn it over to Maria to enlighten us all on this really important disparity. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gwen. And there is really nothing more important than I do ever than talking to folks like you who are working on this and going to be lobbying in person tomorrow. I was really blessed to meet many of you a couple weeks ago. I've been in Jefferson City twice in the last month working on this and other priorities, and Empower Missouri is one of our biggest and best partners in the state. We love you and we're really honored to be here. Your work is amazing. And for everybody listening who participates and is active, thank you so much. I mean, I really just want to say really quick, even though it's not directly relevant today, that we often can feel like, you know, there's a magic bullet, or there's like, if this one thing could happen, you know, it would be okay. And this work is what you're doing here. Everything that each of you are doing on this call is so valuable. And this is much bigger than the crack disparity, right? It covers all the issues that you work on, but everything that you're doing, from having conversations with your friends and family and colleagues to lobbying in the Capitol, is so, so valuable. And so many of us deeply, deeply appreciate it. So please know that. And what we specifically want to talk about today is the crack powder sentencing disparity in Missouri and how we can end it. So you may have heard of this. This is been around for a long time as an issue in various jurisdictions, the crack powder disparity. You may hear it called different things, but that's generally what it goes by. And, you know, the kind of general overview of it is that crack cocaine and powder cocaine are both cocaine. They are two forms of the same drug. So if I was a chemist, or you're a chemist, and your job is to analyze drugs in the lab, and I blindfold you and I have you analyze crack cocaine and powder cocaine, they will have exactly the same chemical structure. Blindfolded, you cannot tell chemically, you know, at that base level, which is which. They are the same thing at a molecular level. So there is no scientific basis for treating them differently under the law, and yet we treat them very differently under the law in Missouri, very, very differently. So Missouri is one of only 8 states that treats crack cocaine more harshly than powder cocaine, and we're going to talk about why that is. We can go on to the next slide, thank you. We're going to talk about why that is and how that came to be and what we can do about it and how you can, you know, assist. So couple main talking points as to, you know, to just keep in your head and kind of practice as you're talking to folks tomorrow. Why should we end the disparity? Why should we care? So, you know, first of all, like I said, there's no scientific justification for it. I try to tell lawmakers about the blindfolded chemist so that they understand. Tell them, you know, Missouri is an outlier, one of only 8 states. We have 50 states, so only being one of 8, Missouri truly is kind of standing on the wrong side of history on this, and it's time to equalize it and come in line with the rest of the country, which has now moved on past this disparity and is no longer treating these drugs the same. We'll talk about in a little bit how the disparity really came to be out of racist policy and how it continues to drive really significant racial disparity. So on that point, you know, let me say too, it's really hard. Everyone on this call, I'm sure, knows that there are so many cases that we'll look at of our loved ones that we read in the news, that we're working on, that we hear of, that we're like, that really sounds, you know, like that came out of that judge, that prosecutor, systemic racism. But a lot of times those biases can be hidden by all the jargon in the system, right? And it's hard to identify and litigate very often in the system those internal prejudices and biases within an individual person. This is something where it is so blatant that there is just like, if you could point to somewhere in the system where the fact that it's driving a racist disparity is incredibly evident. This would be it, right? This is it, and we'll talk about that. So this is one that is really a no-brainer to change. And I'm happy to tell you that that is in fact the response that we're getting in the Capitol in Jefferson City, which is phenomenal, and why we're talking to you about it today. And we really have a hope that we can get this past this session with all of your help. But this is, it's truly, this one is a no-brainer. So public safety, we're going to talk about, you know, this is a big thing for lawmakers. You know, you look at the connection of how many, you know, law enforcement go on to become lawmakers. They care about public safety, and they should. I care about it too. I have 2 toddlers. I live in the city where I live. I've been through a lot. You know, we all care about public safety. Nobody wants to, you know, have something that's bad for public safety. It's not harmed by this. This isn't going to hurt public safety. It's not going to hurt anybody. We're literally just talking about equalizing these drugs. We're not even decriminalizing it. It's still illegal. Cocaine is still illegal. We're just equalizing them. So that's a major point as well. And when we talk about this disparity, it's different in different places throughout the country. So I said Missouri is one of only 8 states in the federal system that still does this. Missouri and the federal system are near the top of the list as far as how bad the disparity is. So I believe it's actually New Hampshire that's the worst, but Missouri is right up there next. Very close. It's one of the worst in the whole country of the remaining jurisdictions that have it. And the way that we treat it differently is 18.75 to 1. So that is the actual ratio of what the disparity is. The disparity is 18.75 to 1. And then to go through some various examples of what, you know, what does that mean? What is 18.75 to 1? What does that look like in real life? And I'm going to walk through several examples. Any of you can have these slides. Feel free to call me about it. We can practice at the end, because I feel like it does take a little bit of practice to be able to talk about the math part of it with fluency, which is not complicated, but I'm not good at math. So if you're like me, this might take you, you know, a couple times to get. So what does 18.75 to 1 disparity look like in real life? Here are some examples in real life. I, Maria, have 1 ounce of crack cocaine, okay? You, Sarah Owsley, who I'm looking at, have 18.75 ounces of powder cocaine. So Sarah has 18 times more of a chemically identical drug than me, but Sarah and I are facing the exact same sentence. And I'll tell you what that usually looks like. It usually looks like I'm black and Sarah's white, is usually what that looks like. Not always, of course. Nothing is true all of the time. But historically, that is typically what that looks like. That's going to look like, you know, the kind of stereotypical is like, you know, Wall Street guys, finance people with a bunch of powder cocaine, and, you know, somebody who doesn't have as much money in a city setting, maybe a person of color with a much smaller amount of crack cocaine facing the same sentence. Another way to put that more specific under Missouri law. I, Maria, have 24 grams of crack cocaine. So I'm upping it now. The easiest way to think about it is like I have 1, you have 18.75. If we're doing this with, like, you know, oftentimes cases don't come in with that exact number, right? So if we're trying to look at a real case example using real sentencing laws, let's say I have 24 grams of crack cocaine. Under Missouri sentencing law, I'm facing a Class B felony. I'm facing a mandatory prison sentence of 5 years in prison. Holly has 450 grams of powder cocaine, which is like that ratio. That's 18 times. So Holly has 450 grams of powder. I mean, think about that for a minute. Think about what that looks like on your kitchen table. 24 grams of crack versus 450 of powder. Holly is facing the same Class B felony and the same 5-year mandatory sentence, even though Holly has so much more than I have. So when we talk about the disparity and what it looks like in real life, you know, you can picture, and there are in fact people with these scenarios behind bars in cages right now who are facing the same amount of time for these wildly different scenarios for something that's chemically the same. It is wild and it is not right. And then finally, Finally, we're going to go to, thank you, Holly. I need a lot of examples to illustrate this for myself. So hopefully one of these will stick in people's minds, and then just learn that one and go with that. You don't need to know all of them. This one is a fan favorite. We did this in M&Ms. So if we did this in terms of M&Ms, this disparity is the mathematical equivalent of one of your kids having 21 M&Ms and one of your kids having 395 M&Ms. That is what an 18.75 to 1 disparity looks like. So that's mathematically what that is. And so that kind of helps you picture it in terms of how much bigger. This is not a little disparity. This is one of the biggest in the country. It's huge. So hopefully those examples made sense. This is probably the most important slide, not because you have to remember it, but just in terms of really understanding, what the disparity is like in real life. So let's back up. I'm talking a lot. I won't talk the whole time, I promise. Why is there, I'm sorry, I meant, I'll slow down. Keep going to the next slide though. But why do we have the disparity? Why is there a disparity in the first place? So many of you probably already know this. We hear about the tough on crime era in the 80s a lot. I honestly wonder if it ever ended, but that's when the kind of political footballing of crime and law and order and tough on crime and all of that really started to gain a foothold, and crime became this political football and started being used so prominently in elections and stuff like that. So, you know, that's when we hear about, you know, the federal omnibus crime bill, President Biden, back when he was a legislator, you know, talking about super predators who were, you know, young people of color in cities, children, right? This is the era that we're talking about. And crack was a fairly new drug to popular consciousness at that time. And so there were a couple things at play. First of all, that tough on crime politicking, the tough on crime stuff in the media that the media really played up and, you know, kind of began that clickbait era in media. Also the fact that crack, and I want to give, you know, a nod to saying that like we're kind of dealing with fentanyl right now, like the opioid crisis, people were in fact scared, you know, parents and families and people who had loved ones who were addicted to drugs, they were scared of what they perceived to be a new drug. And then that kind of zoomed out to being, you know, society and a lot of people being scared about it, not being familiar with what crack was, or scared of things that are new. And then because it was being used a lot in urban centers, it was being used a lot by people who were poor, it was being used a lot by people of color. There definitely was a lot of dog whistling and racism that was behind the increase in laws that criminalized crack worse than powder. So this is not, we're not doing a full history today, but those are some of the reasons why we started seeing these disparities throughout the country, specifically, you know, being promulgated in the 80s. So fast forward to today, we are in a very good spot in Missouri. We are in a very good spot, and we have a month to go before the legislative session ends for the most part. And there are several things pending that I want to take you through. So the first is House Bill 1176 from Representative Chad Perkins in District 40. This was heard in the Judiciary Committee. Many of you, thank you so much to Empower and everyone else who submitted online support for this bill in Judiciary or testified in person or submitted testimony. This was a bill that Chad Perkins introduced, basically repealing, just cutting out anywhere that it mentions crack in the drug trafficking code in Missouri. So when you look at sale of drugs, you know, cocaine, if this passed, would still be a crime, but anywhere that it mentions cocaine base, which is crack, would just literally be crossed out of the criminal code. It would go bye-bye. So it would repeal that and it would effectively end the disparity in Missouri. So that was heard in Judiciary. It has not actually been voted on in Judiciary, although we think, based on a lot of meetings, that if they do vote on it, we have nearly unanimous support. But the good news is that they took that language from 1176 and they tacked it onto another bill that was moving through the House, and that's 1133, which has good time credits and other stuff that I think Empower has some positions on. But that bill passed the House already unanimously. It was 144-0. So even though 1176 technically hasn't been voted on out of committee, the language that's in it was put on this 1133 and has already passed and been sent up to the Senate. So that is phenomenal. I mean, it is so hard to get legislation passed, like Sarah was saying, it's made that way on purpose. The fact that we've already crossed that major hurdle is why I say we are in a very good place to be at that point on, what is today's date, April 4th, with, you know, almost 2 months left in session to get this through the Senate and to the governor's desk. So we have 1133 with the repeal up in the Senate right now. Senator Curtis Trent, also a Republican from District 20, is carrying or kind of sponsoring 1133 in the Senate. So that is moving. But we're not just relying on that. We want to get this heard and brought up from as many different angles as we can to make sure that we get it to the governor's desk this year. And so there is also a bill that was introduced in the Senate, Senate Bill 705 from John Rizzo, a Democrat in District 11, doing the exact same thing. It's totally identical, exact same language. He has introduced that, and it is in line to be heard in the Senate equivalent of the Judiciary Committee. And I know they go in order, so we don't know when that's going to be. We're waiting for that, and I know many of you know these things come up with very short notice, unfortunately, in the Senate. So just keep your eyes open and be checking your email for when that comes up. This isn't on the slide, but we are also looking at other vehicles going up from the House in terms of omnibus bills that are moving to try to tack this on. We are going to get this language onto any bill that we think is going to make it to the governor's desk. That is the plan. We will put it anywhere and everywhere until we get it to his desk. And we're not going to stop until this gets passed. And I'm very hopeful that that could be this session. And we need all of you to do that. So one major talking point that we don't usually have, at least in my experience, is prosecutor support. So we don't often have that for our legislation, and it's nice when we do have it because, you know, like we talked about, so many of the lawmakers are former prosecutors, former law enforcement, and, you know, like it or not, prosecutors are looked at as good guys in the Capitol, and so having their support and having them say this is a good thing and this is not dangerous really does help the bill to move. And it's a very good talking point when you're talking to lawmakers about the bill to say, hey, did you know that the prosecutors support this nationally in Missouri? We worked very hard to get their support and we did get it. And the Missouri Association of Prosecuting Attorneys did submit in writing support for these bills, 1176. And we have that on record. So that is phenomenal. Please tell that to folks. The National District Attorneys Association also said, and I think this helped with a lot of lawmakers, I put the little quote on here, basically just saying, hey, at a national level, we've supported this in many different states and jurisdictions, ending the disparity. They acknowledge that it disproportionately impacts communities of color. And they say, hey, if you get rid of this disparity, it doesn't cause an increase in crime. It's fine, it's good. We think it actually improves community relations with law enforcement because it's taking away a really unfair practice that people know is kind of BS and we're getting rid of it. And so they look at the justice system better once we do get rid of it. So mentioning that prosecutor support, I think, is important. And then in terms of resources, I will put this in a minute. I'll put this website that's up here in the chat. And this has a tab on it. This is the FAM Missouri page. There's a tab on there for the crack disparity. And under that tab has all the resources that you would need in terms of a fact sheet. There's the right to your lawmaker action. There's a bunch of things on there that are testimony. There's a bunch of things on there that you can look at and use and print and post on social media and share. And then if there's anything on there that you need that you don't have, just feel free to call or email me anytime. My contact information is in the chat and I think on the next slide. And I am always available to anyone on this call about this issue or any other issue. And if I can't, if I don't know the answer, I'll get it or connect you to someone who will have it. So please feel free to call, text, email me anytime. And then I'll also tell you that for the Right to Your Lawmaker action about the crack disparity or any other issue, I want folks to know you don't have to use the FAM stock language that we put in there. If you want to go through and click, 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 boom, send, we put language in there so that we can make it as easy as possible for you. You can do this in like under a minute, but you can also erase everything that we have and write in about your loved one, write in about what ending the crack disparity means to you, why you want to see it ended, why your organization wants to see it ended. You don't have to use our language. You can still use the form, which makes it easy to submit to your lawmakers. And of course, you can Google them and do that yourself if you don't want to use our form. It's just to make it easy for folks. So I think that might be the last slide, but if one can confirm that, yes, thank you. And I am 1 minute away from being out of time. Yay. And I would love to answer any questions. I am so happy to be here. And I just really want people to know that we are very accessible and just reach out to us anytime for anything. So yeah, any questions?
Thank you so much, Maria. That was really awesome. Was somebody coming off mute just then? Oh, I was like, I've got a question. Maria, in your work around the country, what are some of the trends that you're seeing that give you hope for where we're at right now with the tide of criminal legal reform?
That's a good question and a tough one. So I would say one thing that FAM did, I think, because it's a tough climate. The election last year was brutal. They're going to continue to be brutal, and there's no getting away from that. I think one thing that we did that we are seeing really amazing results from, that's a slow burn, is our Visit a Prison campaign. So we said, okay, the climate is bad, and instead of sticking our head in the sand about the climate being bad and pretending like we're going to get everything we want passed, what can we do to get lawmakers and policyholders proximate to people that they're not usually proximate to, and especially in prisons. And so we launched this Visit a Prison campaign, www.visitaprison.org. We asked every lawmaker in the country, including in Missouri, to get into a prison. We will organize it for them if they can't. And we usually have them sit down with, most of the time is spent sitting down with people serving extreme and life sentences to hear about their backgrounds, and really just do that humanization piece. And then they walk out very often, thinking, oh yeah, that was a normal person. That's, that's not who I thought was there. Oh, it's not a monster, which sounds so basic to us. But, half of people in the US have not had a loved one in prison, right? Half of us had, but half of us have not. So just getting them proximate, I think, has been very valuable. And then also just every day all around the country, meeting folks like yourselves who are doing amazing work. So if you ever feel discouraged, know that every single day all over the United States, there are amazing groups and individuals and advocates at every level doing work like this all over. And it's very hard to get discouraged when I meet folks like yourselves every day. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That's encouraging and inspiring to hear. And I think the Visit a Prison campaign is a really important just concept to try to break down those barriers and encourage, especially those in power and with power, to see what people in our community that are currently incarcerated are experiencing, and to hear those perspectives directly. Any other questions for Maria? Maria, thank you so much for your time and your expertise with us this afternoon. We really, really appreciate it. And it's definitely gonna be very helpful for all of us that are gonna be in Jefferson City tomorrow, talking to our legislators about this issue. maybe we should, like, I don't know, pick up some bags of M&Ms tonight or something like that and just do the experiment right there for the legislators. I learned a lot, and just in ways of making these kind of complicated sentencing provisions easily translatable. Thank you for breaking that down for us. That was really helpful. So to wrap things up today, we're gonna take a look at some action items. Maria kind of already touched on a piece that we're gonna get to at the end here, but first, kind of in keeping with our theme today of researching a bill's impact, I wanted us to all just take a couple minutes and check out fastdemocracy.com. This is a really, really great tool that Empower Missouri uses. We use the paid version, which just means we can add all of these bills to our fancy internal trackers, but the free version is also fabulous. And you can track legislation in all different states and the federal government. Fastdemocracy.com. So we're going to take just the next 5 minutes. Amber put that link in the chat. If you can go ahead and look up House Bill 1133, you'll select Missouri on the far left drop down where you've got an option of all 50 states. Select Missouri, put HB 1133 in the search bar. And you know, if there's other bills that you're interested in, feel free to look those up too. But just a couple questions that I've got as you're kind of poking around on the site. Try to find the original introduced version, which I won't tell you how to do it yet, because that's part of the exercise, is just exploring the page, but it's pretty easy to find. Find the amendments that were added. See if you can find the amendment with the crack powder sentencing disparity language. If you can find that amendment, go ahead and put it in the chat, just the name of the amendment, who the sponsor was. And also if you could put in the chat, what was the latest action on this bill? We'll take just 5 minutes, so till 12:50 to tool around on Fast Democracy. If you have questions that come up, please feel free to put them in the chat or to come off mute, and we can work through them together. This is a really awesome tool. It has made, as many of you know, I'm relatively new to the team. I joined Empower Missouri back in June, and Fast Democracy has made bill tracking very accessible for me. Just a very easy process to dig in and to stay up to date with where all of these different bills are going. So it's a tool that I think really empowers people to be able to be connected with what's happening in state politics. Oh, Jasmine's on top of it. All right, I'm just going to share my screen real quick, and we'll just take a look at this together before moving on. So here on Fast Democracy, when you've pulled up House Bill 1133, you can go here for a quick summary. You'll see, you know, kind of the breakdown of each action as it happened, and then as you scroll down, summaries of the things that have been added, who testified in support of the bill. Another cool little feature. Let's see. You can go to similar bills. Oh, never mind. Now I'm getting into the pro features. See, I don't know what's what. Well, this is not a paid advertisement for Fast Democracy, I promise. So you can see a breakdown of each vote that it's had, each action that it's had. So the last action is here at the top, March 30th. It was reported and first read in the Senate. And then as you scroll down, this is where you get to the bill texts, which are all just PDF links directly to the House websites. So you can see these various amendments. Here is the amendment. No, I should have fact checked myself before I pulled it up. All right. Clearly, I should have looked at this, because every one that I pull up, I'm like, this has got to be it. It's not it. So there's just a bunch of good resources as you dig into fast democracy. If you ever have any questions about how to use fast democracy, please don't hesitate to reach out. This is a tool that we're pretty familiar with, but we're still learning new ways to use it all the time. And yeah, happy to share that resource with y'all. Next, we are going to just take a minute. If you haven't already ever gone to senate.gov, I believe, do you have that link, Amber? This is to find your legislator, which, as Maria mentioned, so since this has House Bill 1133 is now in the Senate, the folks that we're really trying to target with our messaging on this are the senators that are going to be voting on this bill soon. So pay attention to who all of your legislators are, but specifically your senators. And from there you can go to that FAM, contact your legislator form, which I'm putting back in the chat right now, but you can also scroll up a little bit and see it. And after you have found your senators, go ahead and fill out the End the Crack Sentencing Disparity form and ask your senators to take a stance on this issue. That is high time that Missouri got on the right side of. So we will have just another couple minutes, and then at 12:54, we're going to turn it over and hear about our evaluations and some other final messaging. All right, well, thank you all for joining us. I'm going to turn it back over to Holly to take us out.
Terrific, Gwen. Thank you. Maria, you were amazing. Thank you so much. Sarah, thank you. We are going to put a link in the chat to our survey. So part of what our desired outcome is for this time together is to actually get better and better at doing this every year. So if you all wouldn't mind taking a few minutes, it's just a 10-question survey, super, super easy. We're going to put all of the folks who participate in our survey into a drawing for some $50 gas cards. So we'll let you know if you choose to share your name. We'll throw you into the drawing with that. And just a reminder about what we have going on the rest of this week. Again, tomorrow is our day of action. It is not too late to join us. We are going to provide lunch. We have different tracks. We've got observation opportunities you can go with experts from Empower Missouri to observe some of the hearings that are happening and taking place. You can observe what's going on in the House and Senate floors. We have small guided groups that are going to go do drop-in meetings with our legislators on this issue and others. And then we'll have a few learning opportunities as well on a couple of different topics. So 10 to 3 at the Capitol tomorrow. And then if you're interested in joining us again on Thursday for another virtual session, we've got that set up at noon. We're going to focus on the circuit breaker tax credits for low-income seniors and folks living with a disability. And then Sarah will touch on skill building again, and this time it'll be focused on how to maintain relationships with those lawmakers. And then we also want to highlight, please mark your calendars for the annual Anti-Poverty Summit that we have again in November. This year it's going to be in Columbia, so November 6th and 7th. And we'll be sending out more details as we know them on that, but we would love to see you there. And with that, I think that brings us to a close. Thank you again for sharing your time with us and doing all the great work that you do. And thanks again, Maria. This was wonderful.